Call the Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024 meeting of the East Long Meadow Planning Board to order. I'm required to ask if there's anyone in the audience or on Zoom who might be recording this meeting. If so, please state your name
Sarah Heenan and Reminder Publishing.
and the method of recording. Your phone.
Myself.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing none. By roll call, we have
Bill Fonseca.
Sandra Sherri-Swallow.
Russell Denver, and is Rob there?
I don't see him.
Uh-oh.
Send him a panelist invite.
I also notified him too of this meeting earlier today.
And yeah, so we're expecting them.
Yeah, you still have a quorum if you want to continue with the other matters.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
You need me to read it?
Sure, why don't you read? The A and R?
We're gonna skip ahead.
Yeah, item 5.
Do we need to vote to move ahead?
No, no.
We have a motion to move item 5 to be acted on first.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. A&R, so we're on number 5 right now. A&R 2024-10, request to endorse plan of land reconveying its shared lot line of 2 parcels at 68 Senecal Place owned by Kimberly Renee Strother and 718 Parker Street owned by Ronald E. Humison, applicant Ronald Humison, 718 Parker Street, East Long Meadow, Mass. 01028.
Anyone here for the petitioner?
This is for the A&R, Mr. Chair.
It is.
All right, so I have the plans behind me. So basically what the applicant's requesting to do is to reconvey a shared lot line between 718 Parker Street and the other address was 68 Senecal Place. I have the plans rolled up behind you. If you want me to bring them over, the board can view them before you endorse them.
I saw them online. Does anyone else want us to review those plans?
I took a look at it. All good.
I took a look at them. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do I have a motion to endorse the plan?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. Next item would be to move ahead under new business, item B. Do I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none. Passes. So item B.
SPRW 2024-02, request for site plan review waiver for a 176 square foot greenhouse and a 336 square foot shed at 896 Summers Road to be placed on a site with no current principal residential building. Applicant Thomas K. 265 Millbrook Drive, East Long Meadow, Mass. 01028.
Please step forward.
Oh, yeah, Ralph, I want to.
Sure, you want to take your hat off? Yeah, sure. Okay.
The snowy wonderland. Hello.
So 2 weeks ago, Jason was in.
Yep.
So there's one building on. This is going to be a separate building?
Yep, that's a greenhouse. Well, the greenhouse was the original,
Right.
and then the 396 square foot shed.
330.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it going to be in front, behind? This is mostly for people on.
It's gonna be, it's gonna be in a place where the green, move the green to the left. Yeah, so.
Yeah. So I guess the basic question, just procedurally I have, are how many more of these buildings before you come with the full plan?
This is it.
Okay.
We need something on the property to move forward.
Yeah.
To at least eventually, we need to bring electric in from the road, everything else. So it's gonna be like this, a working shed.
Any other questions? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the site plan review waiver for the 336 square foot shed at 896 Summers Road?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Want to post? Okay. That item passes.
Thank you.
Next item. We'll make a motion to act on case ZN 2024-05. Of order.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, please, do that.
So, you all have the copy with our comments and edits from other departments in town hall that are provided, as well as edits from our attorney. There's some sections in there that are actually highlighted, and I'll discuss what that means in a little bit. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want me to project the language onto the screen so the public can see it, or if you want to discuss it out loud, it's up to you.
Go
I
ahead.
do need a moment to turn on the projector if that's okay with. Ready?
Want me to-
Cool. Alrighty.
Okay.
Go ahead and do that.
In the meantime, I will read it. Case ZN 2024-05 for the addition of subsection. Yes. This little symbol. Section 450-5.11 accessory dwelling units, ADUs, to the East Long Meadow zoning bylaw and for the amendments of section 450-3.3 additional use, dimensional and density regulations. Section 450-9.3 projects requiring site plan review, section 450-11.2 terms defined, table 3-1 schedule of use regulations, and table 3-2 table of dimensional regulations of the East Long Meadow zoning bylaw.
You know how to work this thing? No? All right, Mr. Chair, I apologize for technical difficulty. I'll just read through the text as we have it on.
So why don't you introduce it
Sure,
first
absolutely.
and why we're being asked to act on this specifically? And then you can talk about East Long Meadow's version that you're put forward.
Yeah, so over the summer, the governor signed into law act called the Affordable Homes Act, and basically what it's doing is that it's they call it the most progressive and aggressive housing law in state history. And what they're doing is trying to find ways to make it more convenient and easier for folks to build homes in the Commonwealth. One of which includes allowing for, they're called accessory dwelling units, ADUs for short, by right. So historically, they've been allowed through special permit, which is a discretionary permit in itself. And now the state is eliminating that requirement. So every household that is a single family home zoned residentially in the Commonwealth is allowed to have one accessory dwelling unit on their property by right. This can be done one of three ways. The first way can be a detached building, which a lot of people use an existing garage, shed, or barn that they can convert, or build a brand new building from scratch. That's one way. They call that a detached ADU. The second way is what's called an attached ADU. And usually it's like an addition to the single family home. It could be around the front, back, side, doesn't matter. It's just a physical addition to the main building. And then the third option is called a contained accessory dwelling unit. And what that is a residential unit inside of the principal structure. Usually takes up like a room or two. It has a separate entryway to the outside and to the inside through a shared corridor. And it looks like one giant house. So you can't really tell the difference about that. So in response to this, the state law that was passed in August gave communities around 180 days to enact their own legislation. So the reason why we're having this legislation come before the planning board is because the deadline to do so is February 2nd, before the law goes into effect. Right now, the only part of the law that has gone into effect is updating the definition of accessory dwelling unit under Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 3. So the document that the planning board has before them that I apologize, I can't show up on the screen because of technical difficulties, actually addresses several sections throughout our bylaw, which in some way, shape, or form already contradicts the existence of accessory dwelling units. And those sections have to be updated as well. So Russell, I don't know if you want me to go through the whole thing in its entirety or what the.
So let's just
Passes.
put this right out. So
Sure.
this is a mandate from the state that each community adopt accessory dwelling unit zoning bylaw. So like other things in the last number of years, the state is, they've mandated educational uses, they've mandated, as we found out, solar farms in residential districts. We're required by the federal government to allow cell towers in just about any location in town.
Yep.
So essentially, this is a further stripping away of local zoning prerogative by the community.
I wouldn't say a stripping per se. It's more of a superseding regulation they're putting into effect. So the section they're updating is section 3, which they call the Dover Amendment, especially when it comes to solar. Essentially what that is, it's just a bunch of uses that are protected from local discretionary rule
So they've taken local discretion.
away from the ADUs, yes. So, other categories in there also include solar, home-based or daycare facilities, schools, religious institutions, stuff like that. So now they treat accessory dwelling units to be within that same category as a protected use.
So whether the town believes it's an appropriate piece of legislation or not, we really have little ability to reject this proposal.
So you could definitely reject the proposal, but what I recommend is that if you don't have anything in place before February 2nd, the state law takes effect. And the state law essentially allows for these things to go by right without planning board approval. So what the state law allows for the planning board to do, if we have regulations put into place, is to regulate these through site plan review. You can also allow for the creation of more than one accessory dwelling unit through special permit, but the town does not have to include that language into the zoning bylaw. The only thing we do have to include is whether or not we want to allow by right without site plan review or site plan review. So the bylaw that I crafted and got a lot of feedback on, including from our town attorney, is pretty well crafted. There's just a few things they point out that's highlighted in the edition that you have that they seen as being unreasonable. And it's not essentially clear what is meant by reasonable regulations under the state law. And usually that's one of those things that's either going to be promulgated through regulations from the Department of Housing, Livable Communities, or from case law. And we have not had either of those things yet. And so most towns in the state, they do the special permit path for these types of buildings, including towns like Amherst, East Hampton, Northampton, et cetera. And the biggest thing that I do want to make clear, Mr. Chair, is that the town can no longer require owner occupancy of either the main building or the accessory dwelling unit.
Oh.
And that statewide mandate that's in the law that was passed. 99% of the communities around here that have this in their bylaws require at least one building be occupied by the owner at all times. So that's pretty much the biggest game changer from this legislation, I would say. And that will go into effect on February 2nd if we don't have the appropriate regulations in place now.
So someone who lives in Florida could own the principal residence, put in an accessory dwelling unit, not have to be in the principal residence.
That's correct. Yeah, so there's not much we can do about that one because the town would be liable for challenge if we continue to make owner occupancy a thing for these buildings.
So I'm asking these questions just so the public is aware of somewhat that our hands are tied, but the bylaw we're going to, act on
Mhm.
really is one that we need to put into place, a form like it, to comply with the state law, whether we believe it's appropriate or not.
And we also put additional restrictions in there which are reasonable in themselves. But obviously there were a few that the town attorney cautioned us against including, just so we don't make ourselves susceptible to a challenge and have the bylaw thrown out because of that. So I think, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you wanted me to go through the additions and the deletions.
Well, let's ask board members if you have any questions or beforehand.
No, I mean, we're kind of like everybody's saying, our hands are tied. We've just got to do our due diligence to protect ourselves as best as possible without superseding the law.
I know that Mr. Punderson, although he's not here, called me this afternoon to ask that I just relay his kind of displeasure of the situation in which the state has put us in, further removing zoning from local action, but. So why don't you hit the high spots?
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll just talk about each section, my small edits. And one section in particular, Mr. Chair, I think I should read through is, I believe it's labeled as 5.11, which is a new section that we would create just for accessory dwelling units. I'll start from the beginning. I apologize to the members of the audience. I tried getting up on the screen, but the technology is not working with me today. So I'll just read through very briefly. So Article 3 is the first article that's going to have an edit to it, specifically 453.3, which is additional use, dimensional and density regulations. There is a subsection 1C, which states an accessory building shall not be used for residence purposes. And we amended this language to include unless it adheres to the special use regulations set forth in section 450-5.11, which is accessory dwelling units. Including that allows for ADUs to have residential purposes, and ADUs are also considered accessory buildings under the definition of our zoning regs. They're just slightly different because people can live in them. So if you go towards the bottom, we also include that. So this section here talks about how accessory structures, if they're located 10 feet behind a building, can be close to the property line on the sides and the rear, as close as 5 feet. And we insert a language here that says accessory dwelling units are not included in that. So no matter what, an accessory dwelling unit has to be the standard minimum from the sides and the rear. And then the front, which essentially is the same. So it's the front plus 10 for an accessory building. So say if the main building need 50 feet from the street of setback, the accessory structure, including the ADU, needs 10 more than that. So it'd be 60. And then the sides and the rear would be the same for both buildings, principal and accessory. So moving on to page 3, that is the beginning of the addition to Article 5, which are special use regulations. 5.11 is the new section, which is going to be labeled accessory dwelling units. So Mr. Chair, did you want me to go section through section? And if people had comments, they can just chime in, or how do you want to go about this?
yeah, I would touch on each section.
Sure, yeah. So I'll start with section A, which is the purpose. So the purpose here, drafted, which obviously can be changed. Accessory dwelling units known as ADUs are becoming increasingly popular across the Commonwealth. In response to the Affordable Homes Act, several more communities have adopted ADU regulations, including East Long Meadow. This bylaw addresses the necessary permitting path and design requirements in order to site these buildings in an appropriate manner for the community.
Yeah, so I would like to change that language. So I would recommend that we just say, by state law, accessory dwelling units known as ADUs as required by state law are allowed as of right. This bylaw addresses the necessary permitting path and design requirements in order to site these buildings in an appropriate manner for the community. I don't think we need all of the flowery language that's in there.
So would you say accessory dwelling units known as ADUs, then scratch the middle part and then pick it up from addresses the necessary permitting path?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so moving on to section B, which is terms defined. We have 4 terms that are defined that are section specific. The first is actually,
I don't think you need to go through each one of those.
okay, yeah, that's fine. But those definitions are there, and the definitions are for ADU, attached, contained, and detached ADUs. The bottom 3 definitions are not included in Article 12. But the sections I will go through, Mr. Chair, are C and D because they have some pretty important details.
Yep.
So section C is applicability. So subsection 1 says accessory dwelling units, ADUs, are allowed by right in the residence AA, A, B, and C zoning districts after site plan review approval is granted by the planning board. ADUs are not eligible for site plan review waiver. Subsection 2, ADUs shall not be larger in gross floor area than 1/2 the gross floor area of the primary dwelling or 900 square feet whichever is smaller, and that one's taken straight from the definition of the state. Number three, ADU shall only be placed on residents who have a single family dwelling on them. Number four, no more than one ADU shall be placed on a lot. Number five, a mobile home or any other temporary structure are prohibited from being used or classified as ADUs. Does anybody have any comments about section C?
No.
No? Cool.
So procedurally, Rob?
Yep.
So unfortunately, we thought Mr. Terrell was going to zoom in and he hasn't. I don't want to keep you two here. If you don't need to sit through this, you're welcome to stay if you don't.
I reached out to him earlier
Yeah,
today.
yeah. Procedurally, I don't
Not
want,
get back to me.
so what procedurally can we do to not have to?
So you have to, by default, continue it to the next meeting date, which is December 17th.
Won't be here.
Okay. I mean, you're not going to do outdoor dining between now and,
No, but
April.
we're spending time, spending finance.
that's why I'm trying to,
The board should maybe listen to us and maybe proceed well.
So state law requires that we
Four
have
votes.
4 people here for special permit hearings, unfortunately. I mean, you could also, will you be able to zoom into the meeting or attend virtually? Or maybe you could send your architect on your behalf?
I can send somebody.
Yeah, as long as somebody's here representing you, that should be fine. You don't have to be here yourself physically, if you're going away somewhere. But I mean,
or how would be the first meeting in January? It's the first Tuesday.
I'm sorry, Chairman. I have multiple businesses in multiple states.
sure.
So the rest of the
Well,
year,
if there are
next
any,
3 months,
if there
I'll
are
be
any, there are any
traveling
really
a lot.
pending
fine.
questions involving the homeless representative, I can attend.
Yeah.
I'm the architect.
That's fine.
So, Mr. Chair, the only thing you gotta do is just announce that the hearing is gonna be continued, name the specific permit number, and then just say it's gonna be continued to December 17th at 6 p.m.
And it's the only other thing that I'm pretty sure we touched on was, across the street, the Mexican restaurant. The restriction we put on that was there would be no dining, no one operating on the outside area that your construction after 10 o'clock. So we did that at East Village Tavern, did that at the Mexican place,
Last meal will be served at 10.
No.
No,
done by 10. Everyone's off
Nobody to sit on the patio.
by 10.
correct. We're trying to be consistent with every one of these that come
Yeah.
before us.
We've been in business 30 years here. We've been a good patient, good clients. We've served the community very well. It seems the restrictions you put on businesses are very difficult to stay in business, especially the restaurant business after coming through COVID and everything else. We survived, we've done well. These are things that you guys put in place here so restaurants can survive. 10 o'clock curfew, I can understand not serving anymore after 10 o'clock, but telling patrons you have to leave your seat at 9 o'clock if someone sits out there. You're putting a big restriction on the restaurant itself to insult the patient, the person that comes and eats and say you have to leave. It's a difficult thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but it just seems pretty 10 o'clock to clear your patio seems kind of.
Well, 4.5 years ago, there was no outdoor dining at all in this town. The state allowed this. It worked out well. And so we happily said, fine, we will do this. The restriction for that is for the neighborhood, period. And you're right. When we do a special permit or an amendment to a special permit, we do check with the police department. There were no complaints whatsoever. But we're trying to be consistent with everybody in town.
Mr. Chair, I think we should
Yeah,
cut dialogue. Yeah.
So, December 17th or the first meeting in January?
17th.
Okay. All right, so can you
Make a motion.
make a motion to continue? That takes the number right there.
I make a motion.
My apologies that the two other members aren't here, so.
I make a motion to continue case SP 2024-10 to December 17th meeting at 6 p.m.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And just to be 2 or 3 clear, that you asked them to revise the letter to 15 spaces. So we'll have the revised letter in place for the next meeting.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Apologies for the inconvenience. Want me to continue, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Okay. So subsection D, which is general requirements, it's kind of the meat and bones of the ADU bylaw.
Before you do that,
Yep.
so on the draft,
Mhm.
there was properties containing a second dwelling unit may be considered a two-family dwelling for tax purposes.
I took that out.
Okay, and the reasoning behind that?
So the principal assessor suggested that it wasn't necessary to put in there, but also there wasn't actual guidance that they received from the state about how to classify ADUs and how you would tax them accordingly. So it was suggested by her to just leave it out and not include it because it may or may not contradict something that they get from the state eventually.
Okay.
So that's why it was deleted. Okay, so just moving on. So general requirements, number one, all accessory dwelling units, ADU shall meet the requirements of the following regulations under Massachusetts state law. Subsection A is the Massachusetts State Building Code. Section B is the state sanitary code, and each one of these regulations have the appropriate numbers next to them under legislation. Subsection C, Title V of the State Environmental Code, which regulates septic systems. Section D, any other relevant local, state, and federal regulations, so they're not just limited to those three mentioned above. Number two, ADU shall have the appropriate facilities, including but not limited to kitchens, bathrooms with a sink, toilet, and shower, potable water source, plumbing connections, hot water, functional heating system, proper ventilation, working electricity, and operable windows. And that language is taken out of the state sanitary code, which regulates those things. So number three, accessory dwelling units, ADU, shall not be sold or transferred separate and apart from the primary dwelling. The primary dwelling and the ADU shall remain in common or single ownership. There was a note here from our attorney that, and this is a discussion for the board, if you were to allow the ADU and the main house to become separately owned as condos, that you would need language in there that one of the units has to be owner occupied. But I don't know if the board is really privy to go down that route. And it seems like you might want to keep the language the same there.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make you aware of that just in
Yep.
case, but
Right.
yeah. Number four, attach and contain ADU shall maintain a separate entrance directly to the outside. That's to make sure people don't kind of fumble around designing them. Number five, which was flagged by our attorney as potentially being overly restrictive. Stairways need to access second story ADU should be enclosed within the exterior walls of the dwelling. Otherwise, they must not be apparent from the street. So essentially what that's limiting is that you don't have a bunch of fire escapes leading up to second stories unless it's hidden behind the building or further away. Other towns did have that in their bylaw, including East Hampton. But you know, if our town attorney is suggesting that it might be seen as challengeable, I think we might consider listening to them, but I'm open to comments from the board.
Okay.
No, just keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. Number six, ADU shall be suitable for human habitation all year round and meet the minimum standards of the state sanitary code, 105 CMR 410 as amended. Number seven, occupancy of an ADU shall be limited to what is allowable under the Massachusetts State Building Code, 780 CMR as amended, and the state sanitary code, 105 CMR 410. The reason for that language is because occupancy limits do change in those codes, so it doesn't make sense to limit it in this bylaw. Number eight, ADUs shall have their own individual metered electrical connection in accordance with 105 CMR 410.354 as amended. The town is allowed to require that under that legislation that I just referenced. Number nine.
Well, before you go further.
Yep.
So in your draft,
Mhm.
an ADU shall not be occupied by more than three people, nor have more than two bedrooms.
Yep.
I don't see that under,
7 now replaces 9.
So that was recommended to be taken out by the health director because she says the state sanitary code limits occupancy already and there have been
and what
instances.
is that?
Occupancy limits depending on, I know for the building codes by the size of the building. I think the sanitary code does it a different way. I don't remember exactly how they do it. But there have been other times where bylaws have been challenged because they limit the number of unrelated individuals that can live in a property. Then there's discussions about, you know, maybe young people with like one or two kids and it gets a little more complicated than that.
So I understand what the state is trying to do. I get that. you're gonna put a smaller building next to the principal residence. And, you know, the definition, I think, is no more than 900 square feet or 50% of the total square foot of the principal residence. And so you're putting in a smaller building on the lot with the principal residence that conceivably could have, I mean, I'd like to, I know there's not much we can do about it, but certainly would be something that I hope the town council or Mr. Page would look at to see what indeed are those occupancy requirements on the state's health code. Do you want 6 people in a 2-bedroom, 8 people in a 2-bedroom? And how does that then really change the character of the neighborhood that it's going to be in? Because I do know that there are people interested in doing this. And I've said I've used my own small street of 12 houses. I figured at least 4 could go on that. And so that increases the density 25%. And so it could have a dramatic impact on different neighborhoods and services that are required. And so, okay.
That would get challenged in court, but I think, so I'm looking at how the state sanitary code regulates occupancy. So they set a minimum square footage of living space per person. So the building's a certain size, you're limited to having a certain number of people living in that building. I'm not sure what the exact measurement is. But I know, I think it's like, it might be 200 to 300 square feet per person. So I don't want to say that's the official metric, but it's around there, and
So
that's
that
how they
would
regulate it.
That would equate to what you had in the draft. If you can go up to 900 square feet
Mm.
and it's 300 feet per person, that gets you to,
But I would suggest to just leave that out because the state sanitary code's gonna supersede that anyways. So that's why that point was deleted, Mr. Chair.
thanks.
Yep. So moving on. Number 9 states that ADU shall not be used as a short-term rental. So we do have the authority to prohibit that for ADUs under the Affordable Homes Act. Number 10 mentions 1 off-street parking spot shall be provided for an ADU. The only exception there is that you're within a half-mile radius of a transit station, which we're not applied to us. So you're allowed to require that 1 additional parking spot be provided for accessory dwelling units.
So I don't understand that because because we have public ways.
Mhm.
So if you're a residential vehicle, you can park overnight on any public street in town. So why do we need that language?
Well, I mean, you can think of an example where, say, somebody has a narrow driveway, they can only fit 2 cars. And they're putting an ADU in that's gonna increase the occupancy by 1 more person. So if the board does have the authority to require an additional parking spot be provided for that ADU if you wanted to. It's just the language that's allowable under state law. That's why I put it in there.
But further down under detached accessory dwelling units,
Mhm.
you've got a section that says detached ADUs must use the same driveway as the primary dwelling.
So in that older edition that you have there, Mr. Chair, we updated that language. According to DPW regs, they do allow for more than 1 curb cut on certain properties if the circumstances allow for it. And Tom might be better able to explain this to me, but some properties, police and DPW have agreed that another curb cut is allowable. So they recommend amending that, taking out that language and replacing it with detached ADUs requiring a separate curb cut and driveway shall adhere to the DPW curb cut regulations and gain the necessary curb cut approvals. So it was recommended from DPW that we shouldn't just limit it to 1 driveway because there have been times where they allowed for multiple curb cuts on the same property.
So if someone wants to put one of these in and only has the 2 driveway spots, like you mentioned, wants to put one of these in, needs 1 driveway spot, they could possibly, if allowed, add in another driveway just for the home, the ADU.
If it meets the regulations of the DPW, then technically yes, but they would need a permit.
But if they couldn't, then they wouldn't be able to install an ADU because they couldn't add another off-street parking spot.
Technically, yes. And the state says that we could regulate based off of adding that 1 additional spot if we wanted to. So I'll go back.
Just because you can park in the street, doesn't mean we want people parking
Right.
in the street.
Yeah.
That's why you provide.
But then do you want to look out at that property that used to have 2 cars, now have 5 cars in that, sitting in that driveway? So it's kind of my argument has always been with commercial vehicles, and we don't necessarily enforce that all the time. You look out and you've got 2 painting trucks, 2 electrician trucks, 2 carpenter trucks, 5 landscaping trucks.
Yep.
And it's just, it changes the character of the neighborhood, and it changes the character of, this is changing. This has the ability, I don't know if it's going to be, and I'm going to vote because I'm going to vote in favor because I know we need to, but it's going to change it has the potential to change the character of the town in a way that a lot of people may not like. And I understand that we're obligated to do it, and I understand all of that, but I don't think people in general understand what is the potential, the potential that this could cause, both positively and negatively. We haven't opened the public hearing yet, Mr. Page. Thank you.
Just in case you have any comments.
Okay, yeah,
Oh, I've got a lot.
okay.
Well,
I think it's gonna come to you anyway, right?
I'd rather make them here, so that if it comes to us, we just approve.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Rob.
No, it's okay. To find where I was, off-street parking. There we go.
Yeah.
I recommend the board keep that language in there. Number 11, the ADU shall have a separate address from the primary dwelling.
Oh.
Sorry.
No, but then, sorry. But it's only one spot regardless of the size. So if it's a 200 square foot ADU versus a 900 square foot, no matter
Yes,
what, it's
that's-
only one.
Yes, that's the most we can allow. That's what the law clearly states. All right, going back to number 11, the ADU shall have a separate address from the primary dwelling for the purposes of receiving mail and deliveries. ADU may have the same street number as the primary dwelling and be followed by an alphanumeric character, example 121A, 121B. Both dwelling units shall be easily distinguishable and properly numbered from the street in order for emergency services to identify each building. That was supported by the fire department and police department. Number 12, an ADU shall have separate trash and recycling receptacles from the primary dwelling and must comply with board health requirements. That was supported by the health department, which it is a requirement to have a separate receptacles for a separate dwelling. Number 13 was flagged by our town council as being overly restrictive, potentially. The accessory dwelling unit ADU shall be designed so that the appearance and scale of the ADU is compatible with the primary dwelling. A lot of other bylaws have that language in there, but I did want to mention that it was flagged by our town attorney. I'll keep moving on. Number 14, in order to encourage the development of accessory dwelling units for disabled and handicapped individuals and persons with limited mobility, the permit granting authority may allow reasonable deviation from the dimensional requirements of the zoning bylaw where necessary to install features that facilitate access and mobility for disabled persons. So that includes putting a ramp in a setback or extending the height of a certain structure so somebody can get a wheelchair in. Minor things that typically would require a zoning variance for dimensional regulations, but you are allowed to technically waive that in the section if you have that statement in there. And I think that's wise because that prevents any sort of lawsuit going down the road. Number 15, detached accessory dwelling units. There's about 6 subpoints here that are mostly focused on just the detached ADUs versus the general ADU. I'll go in order. So 15A, a detached ADU may either be the result of new construction or the rehabilitation / conversion of the existing accessory building or structure. The rehabilitated / converted building or structure shall abide by the provisions of this section 450-5.11 in order to be considered an accessory dwelling unit. Letter B, detached ADU shall have separate water and sewer connections from the primary dwelling, shall adhere to the DPW water and sewer regulations. DPW said that that was okay to have in there, and is actually a requirement of theirs to have separate connections. Letter C, detached ADU shall be constructed in the side and or rear yards. Detached ADU shall also observe the minimum front yard setback 4 accessory structures, which is the additional 10 feet that I mentioned earlier, the side yard and rear yard minimums. And I also referenced table 3-2 dimensional regulations as a reference. Town attorney did not flag that one because we're allowed to require strict compliance with dimensional regulations if we wanted to. So they didn't see a problem with that. The next one they did highlight, and I did mention this about the curb cut, but I'm gonna mention it just in case. Detached ADUs requiring a separate curb cut and driveway shall adhere to the DPW curb cut regulations and gain necessary approvals. So I think they probably see that as burdensome because you have to get a permit for a driveway. I think that might have been a slight misunderstanding. But I do want to mention that it was flagged by the town attorneys as being potentially overly restrictive. E, detached ADU shall be limited in height to 1 1/2 stories. And the extra 1/2 is for a pitched roof in case you need attic space for a building with a pitched roof. And F, there shall be no occupancy of a detached ADU until the building commissioner has issued a certificate of occupancy. So the reason why this needs it versus the other types of ADUs is because you're creating a new building here, and before a building can be occupied, it has to get the proper inspections. For a regular addition or a contained ADU, the building already has inhabitants inside of it, so it doesn't need a COO. So that was section D, which is general requirements. I want to leave it up to the board.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to specifically read through review process and enforcement.
Sure. I do want to mention that it is site plan review.
Yeah.
So just so you know.
So are we open to the public?
Well, good.
So this is a public hearing. Like to open to the public who might wish to be heard on this matter, please step forward. I would like to just ask a general question of Tom and Rebecca. So this has come, so the town is in the process of doing the center district. I keep forgetting the proper name of it. Center Town District Review. And one of the components was housing. And it was indicated that one of the things trying to work out of that was to create more housing units in town. So does this really kind of supersede the need for the center district housing component? In your thoughts?
I mean,
Do me answer that?
like, Rob, Luke, do you want me to?
Yeah, come on up.
No, you can
Okay.
from wherever.
No, I mean, like Rob, alluded, we don't, there's no case law, there's no nothing, we don't really know what. I think even Jesse opined, his community, that he's on the planning board for. How's this bylaw, and they thought, they've had it for a while, and they thought it was gonna. And they don't, it just didn't make sense, that as much sense as they thought it was going to. That's not to say that this won't be different in this community. So I don't know, Russ. I mean,
Okay, all right,
It,
fair enough.
right? I mean, I don't know how popular they're gonna be. I don't know, say, what's that real number of how many units we need? I think we need diversity in our housing.
Yeah.
More than some number, that magic number that we have. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, but
Yeah, fair enough.
it's hard to say, yeah.
Okay, also, sorry, go ahead.
I would just offer that we are in the process of creating a housing production plan that would project how many units we need over the next 10 years based on population trends. So that data is being compiled and we'll get a report shortly. But also I would imagine, and this is just my impression of how things would play out, is that if you're offering more different types of housing in the center of town, where you're developing walkable neighborhoods that are close to amenities, you're offsetting the pressure for ADUs to pop up in the neighborhoods. Without a center town district, I think you're more vulnerable for people seeking relief in other ways and taking matters into their own hands and setting up additional units in their homes and around their yards.
So I do agree that we need a greater variety of housing and more of it in town. There's no question. Thank you.
Add something to that, Mr. Shore. So, the cost of building one of these things too is not cheap. So if you were to build a detached ADU, unless it's like an existing building, you gotta lay foundation, you gotta put up the 4 walls, the roof. insulation, heating system, electricity, run water and sewer, then you have to provide a parking spot. That could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. Unless you have a prefab building, which you still need to pour concrete foundation
Yeah.
for anyways, but still that runs you up pretty high.
So at our last meeting, Mr. Terrell said you can buy these online at Amazon.
Yeah, you can. And
Yeah.
they are.
So I actually went online to look at what, I mean,
You can.
you can, get a pretty nice thing for $40,000,
Mm.
That's still
or less, or a lot less.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And that's kind of what is scary,
but at the same time, some communities only see like one or two is
Yeah.
a year permitted, and
Yeah, it's the great unknown.
the most
Yeah.
popular one is probably going to be the attached ADUs because people already have in-law suites anyways.
Yeah.
So they convert those.
Mr. Page, welcome.
Yeah, are we just assuming I'm gonna jump up?
Well, you did say you had comments.
Be correct.
You will never disappoint, Mr.
I try not to. Let me sign in first.
And I would just like to for people who might be watching, I thought our planning director did a really wonderful job on this. I do. I think you did a really nice
I
job.
just apologize for the technical difficulties.
Yeah, really
Sorry.
nice job.
Okay.
It's not an easy one to do, and I thought you did a nice job.
And a quick turnaround too.
Yeah.
And I'm-
We got hit with a deadline that was almost unrealistic.
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
The town council didn't see any problems with
Good.
most of it, so.
Good. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I haven't had a super long amount of time to look this over, but I did have a couple general questions. One, if someone has an existing house, primary structure, they have a detached garage. The detached garage is already in the backyard. It's already 5 or 6 feet from the property line. And they want to put an addition off of the detached garage for an ADU. How is that going to play out? Especially if we put regulations in that says it's got to meet the setbacks. Well, the setback has already been determined by the previous building and they're just doing an addition off of it as an ADU. And if you do an addition off of an existing accessory structure, then does the entire structure fall under the 900 square feet? Or is it just the portion that's the actual ADU?
So it's the portion that's the actual ADU, and usually it's done by where it is in relation to the main building. So if it's off of a garage, it's still technically a detached ADU. Even if it's above the garage, still technically a detached ADU, because it's separate.
Detached garage is what I'm talking about.
Yes, exactly.
So I have someone in town that has a detached garage in their backyard. It's literally 6 feet from the property line.
They can't put it there because this will limit their ability to put it within whatever the setback is of that property.
So that's my question.
Yeah.
So if they move that forwards, even though they attach it to it,
They would have to move the garage
they
to,
would have to
Away
move
from
the
the-
whole garage is what you're saying. then.
yes, it would.
And does that make a lot of sense? I mean, you already have a detached building, they just want to add an ADU to it. And I think these are just general thought processes that I would think it would make more sense if there's an existing building there and you're going to add to it. That you don't make them put a separate building in just as an ADU. You want to blend everything so that it just goes with the neighborhood.
Is this where someone would go and seek a building permit, be rejected, and then they could appeal that to the zoning board?
No.
No.
So usually to appeal building code, you have to go to the state, but in this situation, they would apply for a building code, get denied, and then be told they have to get a permit from the planning board or comply in this way, et cetera. Start that review process. But also, he does bring a good point about existing garage that's 5 feet away from the property line. I mean, would the board consider putting a dwelling unit 5 feet from the property line? Because this is a dwelling unit. Somebody's gonna be living here, they're gonna have windows, there might be kids inside. I mean, that's something to consider too, when you think about it. And also, if you were to require that it has to be the regular side setback and then put it on a building that you're not gonna move, that's just gonna stay 5 feet from the property line. Technically, that makes that building a non-conforming building because it's an ADU now with a garage attached to it that's too close to the property line. So there wouldn't even be an appropriate permitting path anyways if the current language was implemented. So that's also something to keep in mind too.
Next question.
So, under 5.11 C8 says ADU shall have their own individual metered electrical connection in accordance with the 105.
Mhm.
And what are we going to do with existing structures in town that have their existing in-law apartments that the electrical is not separate, but they have their own entrances? I could probably name 10 of them for you that would fall under this category as an ADU. But again, because they had a doorway that you could leave open, it fell under the building code that, hey, that's just an addition to the house. So now if they block that off, now it becomes an ADU, but maybe it doesn't have its own meter. Are you gonna make them go through and rewire, or is it gonna fall under a pre-existing condition? And again, this isn't for direct answers. This is just stuff that,
So it would require that they rewire, if they want to be classified as an ADU, but it's also hard to regulate retroactively through zoning. That's why you have vested rights and nonconformities and stuff like that. So anything that exists now, it's gonna be hard to catch or regulate it unless they come to us for a permit. Then that's when we can start regulating stuff such as the electrical connection. And also, if you look at multifamilies in other towns, most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, you see separate meter boxes on the same building. And the state law also allows for the town to regulate and require that as well.
so, currently, we do not require a site plan for a residential dwelling. From this, any accessory dwelling unit shall furnish a site plan that conforms to the requirements. So my concern, I would be okay with saying any detached accessory dwelling unit shall have a site plan, but if you're putting an addition off of the house for an ADU, as long as it meets the building code and the setbacks, why are we requiring a separate site plan now where in the past you could technically put on an in-law apartment and all you needed was a building permit?
And what if you try to put that going toward the street? And so you change,
Building commissioner would look and
change the
say,
entire look of the house.
your building commissioner would look and say it doesn't meet the setback requirements, or
What
if
if
it
it,
does,
what if it does?
then you're allowed.
I would like to be able to.
I mean,
I would like to
now,
look at-
right now you.
I would like to
Same
be able to
addition.
look at that person and say, you know, you're doing an injustice to your neighbors.
But
That's what I would like to do. I would like to look them in the eye and tell them that.
But if currently you do that and you put, let's say you're gonna expand your living room and you're allowed to go closer to the street and you put on a 25-foot by 25-foot structure, you're allowed to do it. And as long as you meet the codes and the setback requirements, I don't see the need for a site plan for an attached unit.
How would you,
Detached is completely different. I would say any detached building should have one so that you know where it's going on the lot, you know where the utility connections are, and I mean, same thing as far as for utility connections. I'm assuming that an attached or an enclosed, that's part of the house can actually connect into the house's
I think
system, but yet detached would be separate water and sewer.
that's correct.
Mhm.
And I was also told that it's hard to, do you mind if I address 2 points?
Sure.
Rob? So the first one, if you don't have a site plan requirement, how are you gonna approve the additional parking space that's required? And then the second point, I was told by Board of Health, it's actually, they approve separate meters for 2 units within the same building. So that's why that regulation for separate water and sewer only applies to the separate building, because it is a separate building. So you can easily regulate both with separate meters if you wanted to, but usually if it's a multifamily building, you don't really have people paying water and sewer bills in those units. They're just paying electricity. And then the landlord pays for the water and sewer and then does whatever they want with the rent in that regard. So that's the justification for writing the language that way. And that's why, the detached ADU is a separate house essentially.
Right.
It's just smaller. And the attached and contain is kind of like an apartment or like a two-family, except the two-family has shared water and sewer connections. So that's kind of the way that, when crafting this and got feedback from our departments, that's the way we all saw it. I'm sure that's the way the planning board sees it too.
Thank you.
The other thought process is on a separate driveway, requiring a separate for a detached. I think the board should really consider that because sometimes these units, you're not even gonna really notice them. And if the person can park in an existing driveway, I would much rather see that than a whole nother separate driveway, which takes up more green space and all. I have a client in Wilbraham that has what you would consider a pool house. You look at it, the pool's outside, it's a pool house that's got a full living room, kitchen, bedroom. It's an ADU. I don't care what anyone says. And literally when his in-laws come, that's where they stay so that they're completely separate. But there's no ability to put really a separate driveway in. They pull up further in his driveway, they park off to the side and no one has any even back there. And if I didn't work at his house, I would never know. I would just assume it was a beautiful pool house and that was it. And I think that's what we're hoping for is that these units will go in. They just blend in with the neighborhood and you don't even notice them. And
So,
all of a sudden you hear from the neighbor, oh yeah, John's been renting out the back. And you're like, what are you talking about? I didn't know that.
I agree with you. I hope so.
And I will say overall, I was extremely impressed reading through. It seems as though you've hit on most all of the items. I just think no matter how good it is, as we all know, there's going to be something that pops up that we just didn't think about. And like I said, if we can take care of as many as we can before it goes in, that's the best way to do it. I hope that this is continued so that I get further chance to read through.
I think we're
We
under
made some adjustments tonight, so.
small. I think we're also under a time crunch.
Yeah, we are.
Correct?
So.
This needs to be,
I ask?
this needs to be enacted by the town council by February 1st.
Yeah.
So
So,
if I'm under, if it falls under the normal rules is as long as you've started a bylaw, as long as it's been advertised, that bylaw is in effect until, once it's approved. So in other words, if someone came in to apply for a permit, even if the bylaw wasn't completed, as long as it's been advertised, they would still have to fall under the guidelines of it.
So basically what he's referring to is 48 section 6, which talks about vested rights and nonconformities. So if a building or site is currently used for a use or is inhabited, technically any zoning revisions that apply to that type of building, when it's advertised first for the planning board, technically that regulation goes into effect, even though it's still in the zoning amendment process. So in this case, existing houses cannot start putting ADUs in the way the state allows it. They have to do it through the way we're doing it here in this bylaw because of the fact they're existing places. So that's what he's referring to. And yeah, he's.
so
A little bit extra time. If
So
you
with-
have to, I'd rather not.
so with that said, in English, what's the responsibility of the town council to act? Do they need to act on this by February 1st?
So the fact that you have the public hearing now is a good safety net.
And don't put that in when I said in English. Please explain that to me.
So basically, existing houses can't do what the state allows for putting in ADUs. They have to comply with our amendments that we're talking about right now.
Okay.
And it's because of this confusing paragraph at the beginning of section 6 that talks about vested rights, which means rights that property owners have now. But the exception is that when you have a bylaw amendment in place that you're talking about actively that hasn't been fully voted on yet, technically the rules of that bylaw take effect after the first advertisement for the planning board public hearing.
Okay.
So that's basically what is in plain English.
Someone out of prison right now.
Jason Gumpert. You want to take a question from?
Sure. Yeah, it's still a public hearing.
So he has to accept, oh, there you go. I think he accepted it, yeah.
Hey, hopefully you can hear me.
We can't
If I can
see you.
make let me see if I can turn my camera on.
Hi.
Hello. Hope everyone's doing well. Yeah, thanks for taking my comment here. I just wanted to add, yeah, I would like to see the board reconsider the off-street parking requirement. It sounds like it's a factor that's in there partly just to limit the use of ADUs, especially if people are unable to comply with it. And I just generally would wonder why it's in there. It seems like more of an imagined problem than a real problem based on any evidence I've heard about. So I think if street parking is a concern, the town should deal with it in some way, just not maybe as part of these rules. So that's kind of all I wanted to add there. Thanks for holding the hearing, for letting me speak, and yeah, that was it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So it's the pleasure of the board to continue it. Continue this if now there's not the hard and fast requirement to forward this to the town council.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you two. I mean,
No, I mean,
You know.
I heard a lot of technicallys and, probablys and he's right. And that's exactly what the law says.
Yeah.
I asked the attorney specifically, however, we could still be challenged in the court of law if we do not have this bylaw in place by February 1st.
That's also correct.
well, so you made some really valid points. You always do, Ralph. I know you study this. I guess because of the way the charter is written, we're making a recommendation to the town council, and then you are the board that either votes yay or nay on this. So I think, 98%, if not more, I think we are comfortable with. And, the rest can be kind of hashed out in front of town council.
So, Mr. Chair, I do want to ask one question. So it seems like the only change that was recommended from the planning board tonight was to take out the fluffy language in the purpose section.
Yeah.
But I was going to, when I create this report, if this
Flower,
is
not fluffy.
closed,
Flowery language, flowery.
flowery language, there you go. I was gonna make note that that's your recommended change to the town council, so they know what your
Yeah.
recommendations are. That's up to you, what you want to do with the public hearing. If you feel that you're comfortable to move it tonight, then so be it. Otherwise, your call.
Yes, sir.
So technically, the town council's responsibility is to either approve it as submitted. We can make changes, or we can send it back and say, we can't approve it as submitted. From what I've gathered, unless they're only extremely small changes, the town council has shifted a little bit in their thoughts after doing an entire zoning bylaw for the mixed use village, that if it's something that we can't approve in its entirety as submitted, that it's better off just to send it back. That's why my suggestion was, if there's any changes, to make them now, continue the public hearing, see if there's any other input. I mean, December 17th is
2 weeks.
2 weeks away.
so.
There won't be a council meeting in between the 10th and the
No.
January one anyway, so you're not fast tracking anything by continuing to next.
So when is the next town council meeting then?
The 10th.
Of December, of January?
No,
December
December 10th.
And then
And
when?
January 14th.
Oh. So I'm not going to be able to be here on the 17th. So our first meeting in January is the 3rd, I think, or the 7th. 7th.
It is the 7th.
It's 7th here.
Also, I do want to bring up the point that under Mass General Law, because we have a town council style government, technically both the planning board and the town council have to open their public hearing within 65 days. So there have been times where they happen at the same time. So typically town council does their own hearings and so is the planning board, but then the planning board sends the recommendations to town council. Then town council can either accept your recommendations or reject them and still continue forward in the process anyways. So realistically, town council does have to open their public hearing soon. And I imagine it'll be, is it advertised anytime soon, Tom? Or,
There, it's not for the tenth, and we won't, there's no council meeting till the 14th, so we have plenty of time to advertise whatever we
Yeah.
want. January 14th.
Yeah.
so
So I would like to be here.
Sure.
For the discussion.
Yeah.
So,
and you could continue it to January if you want to, but the town council should advertise their hearing as soon as they can for that January meeting, just to start the process.
And they just open and continue their hearing.
Yep.
Yeah,
And they can't close their hearing until recommendation from the planning board anyways.
right.
So that's one thing to consider.
The hearing is the second reading, correct?
So through the chair. So I'm not sure if I agree with that, because the town council has 65 days from the time it receives a petition to do a public hearing.
Planning board too. They both at the same time. The clock starts for both simultaneously.
And this is crafted. So technically, the town council hasn't received a petition from the planning board yet.
So the town council
Council was asked to do is
recommended for public
to
hearing.
make a recommendation whether or not it should even go forwards.
Well, the
Not
town,
whether or not,
do we have the exact language of the vote for that meeting? Because I believe we recommended to hold the public hearing, the planning board, did we not? Because I believe that's what happened at the last meeting. And that's why we started this process.
For the planning board to have a public hearing on the matter.
And that started the clock. So
planning board.
for both.
You have to.
For both.
Once you receive the item on your agenda and dispense of it, you started the clock for the planning board and then also for the council.
but I believe the way our charter works, is we have to say whether or not we didn't want to hear the matter down the road, not whether or not. And I don't know, it had to be
Yeah.
issued to the town.
Very, court's very strict
That's
with
part of the timing. But with that being said, 65 days should still not be an
Yeah.
issue from tonight,
No.
so.
No, they shouldn't. And I do want to say that, courts typically are very strict with the zoning amendment process.
Oh, yeah.
They fight tooth and nail to keep it as strict as possible to 48. So that's why, we have to be cautious and observe the correct and appropriate procedures that are outlined there. As well as observe what's in our charter. So I think 48 supersedes here, unfortunately. So that's one reason why it makes sense to advertise public hearing. Appropriate.
I understand what is being said. So I'm going
English.
in English.
Planning jargon's coming out.
I took Latin at Cathedral, so I don't know if that helps my English or not.
So did I.
As did
So
you.
did I.
You were probably in my class.
Probably was.
So can I get a motion to continue the public hearing until our first meeting in January, which is January 7th at 6:00?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So I do want to say, I've asked a lot of questions. And the reason I ask a lot of questions is I want the public just to know, number one, that we do our homework and we do, as you can tell by the questions that we have, we do our homework. And two, it's our responsibility to ask questions that we know the public should know. And, whether it turns out to be a panacea or not, or if it turns out the other way, it's too soon to tell. The comment about how it didn't really work in East Hampton, it might work here and not work there. It's just the great unknown, but I do believe that, people want their planning board to do the homework for them and make them aware of what's going on.
I agree with that.
And I don't have a particular, I'm either in favor or I'm against, we're being asked to do, we're being required to do this by the state. So our hands are somewhat being tied. So
Technically, we could do nothing at all. I think it's wise for us to do this. Yeah.
it's our responsibility to do. All right. Next item, do we have any outstanding items?
Other business?
other business?
Could you remind me what the first item is in other business, please?
Director's report.
And I believe Mr. Chair, you asked me to also include discussion on the design review committee.
Yes, so
Well-
Mr. Punderson called and asked that we have a discussion about bringing back the design review committee. So he has indicated that he and a number of other officials in town have received comments about specifically the new Chase building in the center of town.
Mhm.
I, for one, as chair of the planning board, have not heard one thing from any person. But we'll leave it at that. So what do we need? And he said that he would volunteer to be a member of the design review committee. So what do we need to do, Rob, to reconstitute the design review committee?
Sure, and I have that in the back of my report, but I'll start with that.
Okay.
And I'll continue the rest of the report. I did look at the language. I included it at the last page of your packet from Article 9, which regulates site plan review. Subsection 9.2 is design review, which includes the board, how they do their review process. So just to go through that language, and actually to address your first point, Russell, to talk about how you can repopulate it. So to my design review committee is still an existing committee, correct? Ever voted out of existence. So the only thing you have to do is just recruit members, and then I believe the appointing authority is the planning board, according to the zoning bylaw. So typically what you do is you would, send out advertisement, have people submit applications, and then hold interviews, which could take about a few months to do. But that's typically the process for populating a unpopulated board. So just going through what's under 9.2, I did take out some key facts that the board should be wary of. So design review shall apply to only non-residential proposals to construct, new or change, alter, modify, remodel, move or demolish any and all existing structures or excluding interior modifications. The industrial garden park district is exempt from design review. And the second key fact is that for external enlargements of less than 2,000 square feet, again, non-residential 2,000 square feet, the planning board may request a determination from the design review committee prior to waiving any or all of the site plan review requirements. So for example, if somebody comes in for a site plan review waiver request, if it's under 2,000 square feet and it's a non-residential building, you could require design review if you wanted to. And talking about the character and the terms of the design review committee, I keep putting in here as design review board, but it's used interchangeably for some reason. It's confusing, but we'll take that. Says the design review board is appointed by the planning board to serve for 3-year terms with member rotation every 3 years after the initial 2-year period. The DRB shall also consist of 5 members with the following credentials if possible. It says the planning director to serve as committee chair, 1 person qualified by training and experience in architecture or landscape design, 1 person owning and or operating a business located in East Long Meadow governed by this bylaw, 1 at-large resident of the town, and 1 member of the board directors of the East Long Meadow Chamber of Commerce or whatever Chamber of Commerce governs the area. It also says here the planning board may appoint up to 2 voting alternate members, at least 1 of whom shall be a business owner representing the business district. In the event that quorum is not obtained, a member of the planning board may participate as a voting member. And then the last point taken out of section 9.2, design review committee shall review applications for all actions that are subject to provisions of this article and shall make recommendation to the planning board prior to the public hearing for site plan review. So you would do design review first, then site plan review for any commercial construction. As to the conformance with design standards established within the section, those are included in the attachment at the end. I don't want to go through each one, but they're pretty thorough.
Okay.
The planning board shall retain overall responsibility and authority for design review approval, which means that they're just advisory. You could take or leave the advice they give you. So that's pretty much it.
So I would ask, are you going to do a little piece in your article about this?
Also, please.
Okay. You want more, you can call Rob. Okay. Is it? Yes, please, please.
Yeah, we
Yeah, please. It's now called the East of the River Chamber of Commerce. If you're
Right.
trying to find that,
East of the river. I like that name.
the River Chamber. And Pete indicated that you know, he would be a member, at least he did to me.
Oh, done deal,
Huh?
done deal.
So he could be, so there's three people right there. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna try to reconvene this. I do know that we are, you know, there will be some projects that will probably come in front of us next year that this would be a good addition to. So that's great. Director's report continued.
Sure, I'll be quick. Our upcoming meetings are included in the director's report for you. The next one, as mentioned, is December 17th and then January 7th after that. There are no scheduled public hearings at the moment for any of the upcoming meetings, aside from the fact that we just continue this hearing to January 7th and then December 17th, we just continued Villa. So those two.
Yeah.
And then upcoming events, just want to keep reiterating that the Citizens Planner Training Collaborative, CPTC, has several upcoming training opportunities. The opportunities are right there. We were hoping that, you know, people would respond to me with any that they're interested in, the town would cover, and these are all virtual. So these topics includes roles and responsibilities of planning and zoning boards, site plan review, special permits and variances, and then writing reasonable and defensible decisions. So those topics, they're good topics to listen to, and if anybody has any interest in attending them, please let me know. The town will pay for your admission. And then the last update that I have is updates in regards to current zoning amendments before the town council, and I'll go through this pretty briefly as well. So commercial kenneling is going to be discussed for the second time by the Plan Matter Subcommittee on December 4th. They're also discussing the solar amendments. The public hearing for that before the town council was continued to their December 10th meeting. The Plan Matter Subcommittee is also discussing that same bylaw tomorrow at 2 p.m. And then there was also two bylaw suggestions from the planning board that were asked to be brought up to town council. They talked about this at their previous meeting. The first of which is the drone bylaw. So overall, the council seemed okay with the proposed bylaw as long as it's addressing privacy issues, which I state to them is a concern. They wanted to hear from the chief of police to see if there's any incidents in town and whether or not it's a concern to them. So they want input from them and also how they currently enforce federal regulations on drone usage. So those are bits of information they're waiting on. That was continued to a future meeting. It's not a public hearing, so they don't have to have a date certain. And the last item is the property upkeep and maintenance zoning revisions, which we call it Russell's rules, but we were discussing it. Rob called it that, not me.
Who called it that?
Rob Terrell did. But yeah, no, property upkeeps and maintenance zoning revisions, that I did fight for it. The council was not in favor of recommending it for public hearing. Some members said that it was seen as too restrictive, specifically the large dumpster requirement and then the parking on the grass. And then some large vehicles, they were talking about how it might be hard to garage them, such as large RVs or boats. So they voted to not recommend that for public hearing before the planning board. But I told them always come back with update language and do it again if you want. So,
I do.
yep.
And I
So,
want to be notified of when it's going to be heard so I can go
sure.
and I can bring pictures.
That's pretty much all I had for my update, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And yeah.
I do have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.